Welcome to the deep dive. We've got a really fascinating stack of sources today. It's all centered on a relationship that is, well, it's captivated people for almost 800 years now.
Yeah.
I'm talking about the bond between Mevlana Jalaluddin Rumi and his spiritual son, Shams Tabriz.
And Rumi is, this colossal figure. Everyone knows his poetry on divine love and unity. But the Rumi we know today, the ecstatic mystic, he was completely forged in the fire of his meeting with Shams. Shams was this wandering, very challenging dervish who was the catalyst for everything.
Right, and our mission for this deep dive is very specific. You've asked us to really cut through the mythology and just look at the arguments, the historical ones, the modern ones, that have been used to say this relationship was unusual, non-conventional.
Yeah.
We're not looking for an easy answer, but exploring why it invites so much scrutiny.
And we have to start with Rumi's own words, because he sets the bar so incredibly high. He didn't just give Shams credit. He basically erased himself. He said Shams was the real voice. His words were, "It is your voice that mouths all my words."
Mm-hmm.
So that's not just respect. That's total absorption.
Okay, so let's unpack that. And I think the best place to start is the modern lens we use to view it. A lot of discussions today, especially since the 90s, frame this bond through an erotic attachment model. Why does that specific interpretation even exist?
Well, it exists because the historical context is, let's say it's ambiguous. Our sources point out that medieval Iran, Rumi's world, it was still thoroughly Hellenized. So you had these ideas left over from the Greek cult of the Ephebi, and one of those was contemplating God through the face of a beautiful boy, a shad.
So the physical beauty was a kind of pathway, a living mirror to see the divine.
Precisely. It was a spiritual but also aesthetic practice, and you have to combine that with the social reality of the time. Strict segregation of Muslim women meant they just weren't present in public life. So adolescent boys often became the objects of, well, both platonic admiration and sometimes libidinous desire.
Right, and that distinction is so important for this whole discussion. The difference between the cultural environment and a person's individual orientation.
Absolutely. The sources are very clear on this. Acknowledging a homoerotic environment is not the same thing as assigning a homosexual orientation to everyone in it. It's just the water they were swimming in.
But that water was also murky, wasn't it? It wasn't all just high-minded admiration.
Far from it. And this is where the sources get a little gritty. They admit that some Sufis were, in fact, accused of using the dervish cloak to hide, well, libertine excess.
Yeah.
We even see it right there in Rumi's own circle. Shams himself felt he had to warn Rumi's son, Sultan Valad, to stay away from hashish and sodomy. He called them two great vices apparently widespread among the Sufis.
Wow. So that paints a picture of a spiritual world dealing with very human issues.
Okay, so the culture was charged. Let's pivot from the general environment to the specific event. Because the biggest argument for this being an unusual bond is the radical change it caused in Rumi.
It was a detonation. You said it. And to get the scale of it, you have to know who Rumi was before. This wasn't just some local teacher. He was a pillar of the intellectual community, a famous legal scholar, an expert in hadith, the sayings of the prophet. His life was structure. It was law.
And what kind of authority would a hadith expert have back then?
Immense authority. He was interpreting the very foundation of the religious framework. For him to abandon that path, it would be like a Supreme Court justice suddenly quitting to become, I don't know, a street performer. It just makes no sense.
And that's exactly what happened. He just stopped teaching. He did. He stopped all his legal work and was instantly transformed. He became this ecstatic mystic, totally dedicated to Sama. And Sama is the whirling ceremony, the music, the poetry, the movement. What's really shocking is that Rumi used to hate poetry. He said it was as disgusting to him as plunging one's hands into the guts of an animal.
So he didn't just change his job. He abandoned his entire calling for something he had publicly despised. What does that tell you about the kind of magnetism Shams must have had?
It suggests an absolute, almost hypnotic authority, and it was instant. And that intensity, you see it in their very first interaction, which is another huge argument for the unusual label. And the seclusion.
The famous 6 months in a room.
Exactly. For 6 months, they closeted themselves away, talking, and allowed no one in. I mean, think about the social disruption. A man of Rumi's status, a teacher, a father, a husband, just vanishes from public life for half a year. It was seen as deeply, deeply strange.
It wasn't just exclusive, it felt like social negligence to his community.
It was. And then you add the language they used for each other. Rumi called Shams things that bordered on divine, and Shams said Rumi was worthy of worship. They saw each other as these unique, singular mirrors for the divine. Nobody else would do.
And when that intensity created a backlash and Shams left Konya, Rumi he didn't just accept it.
Yeah, it was an almost obsessive pursuit. He traveled all the way to Damascus looking for him. He was going to go a third time after Shams came back and left again. That kind of consuming need, that reliance on one single person, even for Sufis, was seen as exceptional.
And that reliance leads us straight into the third big argument for this being unconventional, which is like this sheer amount of social conflict and jealousy it caused.
The fallout was brutal. I mean, you have Rumi's own disciples, his own family. They were intensely jealous. They saw Shams as this unworthy interloper who's basically stealing their master. Rumi's son, Ala al-Din, was apparently one of the most hostile.
So it became a real threat to the order of his own household.
A huge threat. And Shams knew it. He said he would eventually disappear in a way that no one would ever find him, which is, of course, exactly what happened. And it led directly to those very potent rumors that he was murdered. Murdered by Rumi's own jealous disciples, possibly including his son. The bond's intensity led to tragedy.
I saw in the sources that Rumi even tried to sort of normalize things with the marriage, but that failed completely.
It was a desperate move, really, trying to integrate Shams into the settled world he knew. He arranged for Shams to marry Kimia, a quiet girl who was raised in Rumi's own house. The hope was that giving Shams these domestic ties would, calm everyone down.
But it didn't work at all.
Not even a little. The marriage was a disaster, and tragically, Kimia died very quickly. Some say it was the stress of it all, but it did nothing to fix the tension. If anything, it just amplified the idea that Shams was this chaotic, disruptive force.
So Rumi is in this consuming, unconventional relationship in a culture that's already complicated about male intimacy. But how did Rumi himself feel about all the ambiguity in other Sufi circles?
That's a great question, and we have evidence he was very sensitive to it. He was really quick to dismiss a contemporary Sufi, Ahad al-Din Kermani, who claimed he loved the boys around him chastely. Rumi basically said, I don't buy it, which shows he was very aware of and very critical of these kinds of questionable behaviors.
But wait, if he's so critical of others, doesn't that make the argument for his relationship with Shams being purely spiritual even stronger?
It creates this fascinating tension, right? That's the core of the ambiguity. He's pushing back against the worldly, sensual side of things, while at the same time having the most intense, obsessive spiritual intimacy of his life. And to support that, you have his wife's testimony, Kara Khatun.
What does she have to say about it?
Well, she complained about his asceticism. She said he didn't attach any importance to physical beauty. She was basically complaining that he had no interest in worldly beauty, including her. So this paints a picture of a man actively resisting those sensual currents, even while his relationship with Shams drew all the same criticism.
Okay, so let's synthesize this for everyone listening. Why is this bond seen as so unusual?
It's the convergence. It's the intense, socially disruptive devotion, the seclusion, abandoning his career, the pursuit to Damascus. It's the non-conventional, almost worshipful language they used. And finally, it's that this all happened in a historical context that was already charged with Sufi homoeroticism and rumored vices. He was caught in the middle of it all.
And yet, for the Mevlevi order, the tradition that came from Rumi, the meaning is much more metaphysical, right?
Absolutely. They frame it as a necessary union of two opposite forces. You have Shams, who represents the nomadic culture, no hierarchy, constant travel, God is everywhere. And then Mevlana, who is the settled culture, order, tradition, established knowledge.
The ultimate clash, the immovable object and the unstoppable force.
Exactly. Their meeting was that necessary, volatile shockwave. It even mirrored the greater chaos of the age, with the Mongol invasions destroying settled life everywhere. Their personal relationship reflected a kind of cosmological need for structure to be broken by freedom.
Which brings us back to the ultimate spiritual goal here, which was for Rumi to become the Insani Kamil, the perfect man. The ideal being who can perfectly reflect the divine.
And for that, you need a perfect mirror. A famous metaphor says a mirror must achieve yokluk, a state of non-existence, of a self-effacement, to be pure. So the question to leave everyone with is this. What level of intense, unconventional self-effacement did Rumi have to go through? Was all that chaos, all the obsession and social disruption, just the fire he needed to achieve total yokluk? The fire needed to burn away his old self so he could reflect the divine light he saw, and saw only in the fierce, disruptive presence of Shams.